The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the weathered walls of the Red Canyon ranch house. Outside, December wind howled through the Arizona night, rattling the shutters and sending spirals of snow against the frosted window panes. Inside, warmth and memory filled the space between grandfather and grandson. James Redstone sat in his leather chair, a man carved from the same red stone as the canyon walls surrounding his home. At 66, his face bore the map of a life lived hard and honest. Silver streaked through his long black hair, tied loosely at the nape of his neck. Scars marked his weathered hands, each one a story, each one earned. His eyes, dark as midnight, reflected the firelight and something deeper. The weight of years of choices of survival. Across from him, Daniel Bennett leaned forward, 17 years old and hungry for truth. The boy held an old Winchester rifle across his lap, the wood worn smooth by generations of hands. His grandfather had called him here tonight to this room where the past lived in every photograph on the mantel, every artifact on the walls. Daniel broke the silence first. His voice carried the uncertainty of youth facing the complexity of age. Grandpa James, people in town say that Grandma Sarah wasn't really your wife, not at first anyway. They say you won her in some kind of lottery, that you bought her like property. He paused, watching his grandfather's face for reaction. James remained still, his gaze fixed on the flames. Only his jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath weathered skin. They say she was sold to you, that it was barbaric. Is any of that true? The old man's silence stretched long enough that Daniel wondered if he would answer at all. Then James shifted in his chair, the leather creaking. He reached for the Winchester, took it from his grandson's hands, and held it with the reverence one reserves for sacred things. This rifle, James began, his voice like gravel smoothed by river water, has taken 3 lives. It has also saved 12. Your grandmother's was one of them. He set the rifle across his knees, his fingers tracing the stock. The story people tell in town is true, and it is also a lie. Truth is like this canyon. You can see the surface, the red rocks, and the sky. But beneath the surface runs water you cannot see, carving deeper channels, creating caves and passages that go on for miles. What happened between your grandmother and me, it has depths those people will never understand. Daniel pulled his chair closer. The wind outside seemed to quiet, as if the night itself wanted to listen. Tell me, the boy said. All of it, the parts people don't know. James looked toward the bedroom where Sarah slept, 60 years old now, and fighting the illness that would take her before spring came. They both knew it, though neither spoke of it. Time was running short. Your grandmother is dying, James said quietly. And when she's gone, I will be the only one left who knows the whole truth. After I'm gone, there will be no one. He turned back to Daniel, and for the first time that evening, something like vulnerability crossed his weathered face. I am going to tell you everything, from the beginning to the end. And when I'm done, you will understand why I'm giving you this rifle. Not because of what it can do, but because of what it represents. Mercy, choice, the difference between survival and murder. The old man shifted, settling deeper into his chair. His eyes grew distant, seeing not the fire before him, but another fire burning 31 years ago in a different time, a different world. It was July 1882, the 3rd year of drought, the summer when Dry Creek decided that desperation justified cruelty, the summer they invented the bride lottery. As James spoke, the room seemed to fade. Daniel felt himself pulled backward through time, through his grandfather's memory, into the heat and dust and shame of that Arizona summer when everything changed. The sun beat down on Dry Creek with the merciless intensity of a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil. July heat shimmered off the dirt streets, turning the air itself into a visible entity, wavering and unstable. Dogs lay panting in whatever shade they could find. The few trees that still lived stood skeletal and brown, their leaves long since surrendered to the relentless sky. In the town square, a crowd gathered. Men, mostly their faces burned red by sun and reddened further by whiskey. They wore their Sunday clothes despite the weekday, as if the occasion demanded ceremony, as if what they were about to do was dignified rather than desperate. Marcus Webb stood on a wooden platform hastily constructed for this purpose. At 47, he carried himself with the confidence of a man who owned things. He owned the bank. He owned most of the land deeds in town, and through a series of legal maneuvers that would make a lawyer blush, he had arranged to own something else today. Sweat glistened beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His suit expensive fabric that spoke of Eastern money clung to his frame. He smiled at the crowd, but the smile never reached his eyes. Those eyes calculated, assessed, measured profit against risk. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "we face a crisis. Our town owes $15,000 to the Eastern Railroad Company. According to the Arizona Territory Land Act of 1881, failure to pay within 90 days results in the seizure of all public lands." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the crowd like dust. "We have 60 days left. The solution before us today is unorthodox. I will not pretend otherwise. But desperate times demand desperate measures." Near the back of the platform, 12 women stood in a line. They wore their best dresses, though those dresses showed the wear of hard years. Their faces carried expressions ranging from resignation to barely concealed terror. Among them stood Sarah Bennett. At 29, Sarah had been the town school teacher until 6 months ago when her husband died. David Bennett, a lawyer with too much integrity for his own good, had caught a mysterious illness 2 days after meeting with Marcus Webb about mortgage discrepancies. The official cause of death was listed as fever. Sarah suspected otherwise but could prove nothing. Now she stood with the others, her hands clasped tightly before her to stop their shaking. Her dark hair, usually pinned with care, hung limp in the heat. She had spent the last night crying. This morning she had no tears left. Marcus continued his speech, explaining the mechanics of the lottery. Each man could purchase a ticket for $10. $10 in gold, not paper money. The tickets would be placed in a wooden bowl. One by one, the women's names would be drawn. The man whose ticket was pulled would take that woman as his wife, legally binding, no possibility of annulment. "The church has agreed to conduct ceremonies immediately following the drawing," Marcus explained. "All marriages will be recognized under territorial law." Pastor Johnson stood to the side, his face gray with shame. He had protested this lottery, had called it slavery disguised as charity, but he had been outvoted by the town council, all of whom were in Marcus Webb's pocket. The men in the crowd laughed and joked as they lined up to purchase tickets. They dropped their gold coins into Marcus's strongbox with the casual enthusiasm of gamblers at a horse race. No one seemed to notice or care that the women were weeping. Sarah searched the crowd for a friendly face and found only one. Ruth Miller stood near the edge, her 8-year-old son clinging to her skirts. Ruth had been Sarah's friend since childhood, but today Ruth would not meet her eyes. There was guilt in that avoidance, though. Sarah did not yet understand why. The sun climbed higher. The coins clinked. The wooden bowl filled with folded tickets. Marcus smiled his empty smile and prepared to begin the drawing. Then the saloon doors opened. The sound cut through the noise of the crowd like a knife through cloth. Men turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the wind seemed to pause. James Redstone stood in the doorway. He was 35 years old, 6 feet 2 inches of muscle, and controlled violence. His skin darkened by sun, and heritage marked him as different in a town that prided itself on whiteness. Long black hair hung past his shoulders, tied with a leather cord. He wore buckskin pants and a fringed vest over his bare chest. A Winchester rifle, the same one that would later be passed to Daniel, rested across his shoulders. At his hip hung a Colt Peacemaker, .45 caliber, the grip worn smooth by constant use. But it was his eyes that stopped men's breath. Dark and fathomless, they held something ancient and dangerous. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much death and had long since made peace with his own mortality. The crowd parted as James walked forward. No one spoke. No one dared. James Redstone was known. 4 years ago, he had lived in a small Apache village with his wife Anna, an Irish school teacher with red hair and too much courage. They had a son, William, barely 6 years old. Then came the raid. The United States cavalry hunting Apache warriors had swept through the village. Anna was killed, shot in the back while trying to shield her child. William was torn from her dying arms and taken away. James, out hunting when the raid occurred, returned to find his wife's body cold and his son gone. He had tracked the cavalry to Fort Apache, had killed 3 soldiers in his rage before being shot himself. He survived. William disappeared into the machinery of government. One more Apache child vanished into the system of forced assimilation. For 4 years, James had searched. Fort Grant, Tucson, Phoenix, across the border into Mexico. Every lead ended in frustration. Every hope turned to ash. And then 2 days ago, drunk and careless, Thomas Gray had let something slip. Thomas Gray, the hunter who worked for Marcus Webb, Thomas who had once been a cavalry sergeant, Thomas whose guilty eyes could never quite meet James's gaze at the trading post. Marcus knows where that Apache boy is, Thomas had muttered into his whiskey. Fort Grant, sold to some rancher, legal apprenticeship they called it. James had pressed for more, but Thomas had already said too much. The hunter had stumbled away, leaving James with a fragment of hope more painful than despair. So James had come to Dry Creek, not for the lottery, not for the spectacle of men buying women like cattle. He had come because Marcus Webb held information about William. And if Marcus was here, distracted by this obscene carnival, James could search his office for records for any clue to his son's location. But seeing the women on that platform, seeing Sarah Bennett with tears streaming down her face, something in James had shifted. A calculation had formed. If Marcus was capable of this, of selling human beings in the name of profit, then Marcus deserved to see his plans turned against him. James reached the ticket table and dropped a $10 gold eagle onto the wood. The coin rang clear in the silence. It was a Liberty head minted that very year, 1882. The sound of it seemed impossibly loud. Marcus Webb's face went white, then red. "You cannot participate," Marcus said, his voice tight. James met his eyes with a gaze flat and emotionless. "Your poster says, 'Any man who pays, I am paying,' unless you want to publicly admit your law only applies to white men. That would violate the 14th Amendment. Would it not, Mr. Webb? I believe you are a banker, not a constitutional scholar, but even you must know that would invite federal scrutiny." The crowd held its collective breath. Federal scrutiny meant questions. Questions meant investigations. Investigations meant the exposure of Marcus's various schemes, the falsified deeds, the land stolen from Apache families through legal trickery. Marcus's jaw worked. His hands clenched. But he had built his empire on the appearance of legitimacy. To deny James now would crack that facade. "Fine," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "One ticket." He snatched the coin and dropped a folded paper into the bowl with the others. His hands shook with barely controlled rage. James stepped back, his face betraying nothing. But inside a plan formed. He had not come for a wife. He had come for information. But if fate drew his name alongside one of these women, he could protect her from whatever Marcus had planned. And Marcus would be forced to watch impotent as his scheme unraveled. Sarah, watching from the platform, felt her breath catch. She did not know this man, this Apache with eyes like winter nights. But she knew rage when she saw it, and she saw it now, barely leashed beneath his calm exterior. For the first time that morning, she felt something other than despair. She felt a small, fragile spark of hope. Marcus climbed onto the platform, his smile returning, though it looked more like a grimace. He held the wooden bowl high. "Let us begin," he announced. "Let fate decide who takes the bride today." He reached into the bowl and stirred the papers. His fingers, Sarah noticed, moved with deliberate precision. He was searching by feel, trying to identify his own ticket. Marcus had planned to win Sarah himself. He had rigged the system, had ensured his ticket would be distinguishable, but James's unexpected entry had complicated things. Now there were too many tickets, and Marcus's fingers fumbled in the bowl, uncertain which paper to pull. Finally, he grasped one and withdrew it. The paper trembled slightly as he unfolded it. His face, already flushed from heat, went darker. "Sarah Bennett," he read, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Around her, the other women gasped. Ruth in the crowd brought her hands to her mouth. Marcus cleared his throat, steadying himself. "The winning ticket belongs to James Redstone." For a moment, no sound. Then the crowd erupted. Men shouted in protest. A woman screamed. Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the platform. "He cannot take her," a voice yelled. "He is a savage." "This is wrong," another joined in. "She is a white woman." James ignored them all. He walked forward with the steady pace of a man who had walked through worse storms than human outrage. He climbed the platform steps, each footfall deliberate and certain. Sarah watched him approach. Up close, she could see the scars on his shoulders, faded white lines against darker skin. Battle scars, survival scars. His face, angular and weathered, showed no cruelty, only exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had carried grief for too long. He stopped before her. His eyes, which had been hard as flint when facing Marcus, softened slightly when they met hers. "I did not come here to claim a wife," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her. "I came to shame them, to show these men what it means to play with human lives. But now your name is mine by their law." Sarah found her voice, though it trembled. "What will you do with me?" James was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his words carried a weight that went beyond simple promise. "Keep you alive." That is more than he would do. He gestured toward Marcus without looking at the banker. Sarah followed his gaze and saw Marcus's face twisted with frustration and rage. Suddenly she understood. Whatever James's original purpose, he had just saved her from something worse. Marcus had wanted to win her himself. The lottery had been designed to give him legal cover for what would have been in essence purchased rape. James extended his hand, not to grab, not to claim, but to offer. An invitation, not a command. Sarah looked at that hand, weathered, scarred, but steady. She looked at the crowd below, at the men who had laughed while purchasing tickets, at Marcus, who had engineered this entire obscenity. She placed her hand in James's. His grip was firm, but gentle. He led her down the platform steps through the crowd that parted in stunned silence. No one tried to stop them. No one dared. At the edge of town, two horses waited. An Appaloosa with distinctive spotted markings and a sorrel mare. James helped Sarah mount the mare, his touch careful, respectful of her space and dignity. "We ride to Red Canyon," he said, "my home. When we arrive, you will have choices. But first, we must leave this place." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Her mind reeled with the speed of change. 1 hour ago, she had been a woman sold at auction. Now she rode beside a stranger into the unknown, and somehow, impossibly, she felt safer than she had in months. Behind them, Dry Creek erupted into chaos. Men argued. Marcus shouted orders. But his voice faded as they rode east toward the rising hills and the red rock canyons beyond. Ruth Miller watched them go, her son still clinging to her skirts. Tears streamed down her face. She had done nothing to help Sarah. She had stood silent while her friend was degraded and sold. Marcus appeared beside her, his hand heavy on her shoulder. "You will go to Red Canyon in 3 days," he said quietly. "You will convince her to return. Tell her I will forgive her debts. Tell her whatever she needs to hear. Do this, and I will pay the doctor's fees for your son. Refuse, and I will ensure you lose your house." Ruth looked up at him, seeing truly for the first time the monster beneath the suit. "You planned this," she whispered. "You planned to win her yourself." "Of course I did," Marcus said. "Sarah Bennett is educated, beautiful, and owns land that adjoins mine. With her as my wife, I could have consolidated that property. The railroad needs a route through Red Canyon. That route is worth $200,000, but now that savage has complicated matters." He released Ruth's shoulder and straightened his jacket. 3 days. Go to her, convince her to come back or suffer the consequences. Ruth nodded numbly. She watched Marcus walk away, then looked toward the horizon where Sarah and James had disappeared. "Forgive me," she whispered to the dust in the dying light. "Please forgive me." The journey to Red Canyon took 6 hours. They rode through country that shifted from dusty scrubland to pine forest to the beginning of true canyon territory. The Salt River, reduced to a trickle by drought, cut through ancient stone. Above them, red cliffs rose like cathedrals carved by water and wind over millennia. James let his posture easy in the saddle, though his eyes never stopped scanning the landscape. Sarah followed, her body aching from the unfamiliar ride. She had ridden horses before, but never for such distance, never through such rough country. They stopped once at a small spring hidden among rocks. James dismounted and filled 2 tin cups with water. He handed one to Sarah without comment, then drank deeply from his own. The water was cold, fresh tasting of stone and minerals. Sarah studied him while he drank. In profile, his face could have been carved from the same rock as the cliffs surrounding them. Strong jaw, high cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once. His hair, unbound, now fell past his shoulders in waves of absolute black. He was, she realized, beautiful in the way wild things are beautiful, untamed, dangerous, essential. He caught her looking and raised an eyebrow slightly. "You have questions," he said. It was not a question itself, but a statement. Sarah set down her cup. "Why did you really enter that lottery?" James was quiet for a moment, then gestured for her to sit on a flat boulder. He sat nearby, maintaining distance between them. 2 days ago, he began, I learned that Marcus Webb has information about my son, my boy, William. He was taken 4 years ago when his mother was killed. I have searched for him across 2 territories and found nothing. Then I heard Marcus's name connected to the disappearance of Apache children. Children sold as apprentices to ranchers, miners, anyone who wanted cheap labor that the law would not protect. His voice remained level, but Sarah heard the current of rage beneath it running deep and cold. I came to Dry Creek to search Marcus's office while he was distracted by the lottery. I did not intend to participate, but when I saw what he was doing, what he had reduced you and those other women to, I decided he should see what it feels like to lose something he wanted. Sarah absorbed this. The pieces aligned. The rage she had sensed was not directed at her, but at the system that had stolen his child and degraded her dignity in the same transaction. Your son, she said softly. What happened to his mother? James's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, and his words painted pictures more vivid than any photograph. Her name was Anna McGrath, before she married me. She came from Ireland by way of Boston to teach in the mining camps. She had red hair and freckles and more courage than sense. When she met me, I was working as a scout for the cavalry. She saw a man, not a savage. That was rare. He paused, his eyes distant. We married in 1867 at Fort Apache. Her family disowned her. My Apache family accepted her because she respected our ways, learned our language, treated the children with kindness. William was born 5 years later. He had her eyes, blue-green like creek water in spring. Sarah waited, sensing the story's dark turn approaching. In April 1878, the cavalry raided our village. They were hunting warriors who had left the reservation. But our village was peaceful. We had papers, permissions, everything the government required. It did not matter. Major Caldwell wanted Apache scalps to justify his command's expenses. His hands unclenched. I was hunting 5 miles away. I heard the gunfire. By the time I returned, Anna was dead, shot in the back while running with William in her arms. She died instantly. William, 6 years old, was taken. 3 soldiers grabbed him while he screamed for his mother. I killed 2 of them before Thomas Gray shot me in the shoulder. I woke 2 days later in the fort's infirmary. William was gone. No records. No trace. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. She had not realized she was crying. I searched for 4 years, James had continued. Every fort, every reservation, every ranch that might employ Apache labor. Nothing. Until 2 days ago, when Thomas Gray, drunk and guilty, let slip that Marcus Webb knows William's location. That Marcus was involved in moving Apache children through something he called apprenticeships. Legal slavery with paperwork. He turned to look at Sarah directly. So I came to Dry Creek, and I found you. And now we are here, 2 people bound by lottery, but not by choice. I will not force you to be anything you do not wish to be. But I need time to find my son, time to make Marcus Webb answer for what he has done. Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Understanding settled over her like a cloak. James had not bought her. He had inadvertently saved her while pursuing his own desperate quest. They were allies by accident, united by Marcus's cruelty. My husband died 6 months ago, Sarah said quietly. David Bennett. He was a lawyer, a good man. Too good, perhaps. He was investigating Marcus's land deeds. He told me something was wrong, that Marcus had forged documents to claim Apache territory. 2 days after meeting with Marcus about it, David fell ill. Fever, the doctor said. But it came on so suddenly, so violently. She met James's eyes. I think Marcus poisoned him. James nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Marcus Webb poisons everything he touches. Land, law, people. He is not just greedy, he is ambitious. The railroad wants a route through Red Canyon. That route is worth fortunes. To get it, Marcus must clear the land. He must remove anyone with a legal claim. Me, you, anyone who stands between him and profit. Sarah felt a chill despite the July heat. Then we are both in danger. Yes, James said simply, but in Red Canyon I know every rock, every passage, every hiding place. Marcus and his men cannot touch us there without great cost. You will be safe. I give you my word. Sarah searched his face for deception and found none. Only exhaustion, grief, and a kind of weary honor. Then I will help you, she said. If you teach me to survive in this place, I will help you find William. James's eyes widened slightly. It was the first time she had seen surprise cross his features. Why would you do that? Because you saved me from Marcus. Because your son deserves to know his father. And because I know what it is to lose someone you love. She extended her hand. Partners, not husband and wife, not captor and prisoner. Partners. James looked at her hand for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and clasped it. His grip was firm, his palm rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. Partners, he agreed. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined, two broken people making a promise neither fully understood. The sun continued its arc across the sky. Water trickled from the spring. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. Finally, James released her hand and stood. We have 3 more hours to Red Canyon. The trail becomes difficult. Stay close. Sarah rose and followed him back to the horses. As she mounted, she realized something profound had shifted. She had entered this day as a victim, a woman sold like property, but she would end it as something else entirely. A survivor, a partner, a woman with purpose. The horses climbed into the hills as afternoon shadows lengthened. Behind them, Dry Creek faded into memory. Ahead, Red Canyon waited hidden in secret, a refuge carved from stone and time. They reached Red Canyon as the sun touched the western horizon, painting the cliffs in shades of copper and gold. The entrance was so narrow, Sarah almost missed it. A crack in the rock wall, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through single file. James dismounted and led his Appaloosa through, gesturing for Sarah to follow. The passage twisted for 50 yards through solid stone. Above, the walls rose so high that only a ribbon of sky remained visible. Then suddenly the passage opened into a hidden valley. Sarah gasped. Red Canyon was perhaps half a mile across, surrounded on all sides by sheer cliffs 300 feet high. A spring-fed creek ran through the center, lined with cottonwoods and willows. Grass, still green despite the drought, covered the valley floor. At the far end stood a cabin, small but solidly built from pine logs. Beside it, a corral held 2 more horses. This is my home, James said quietly. The Apache called this place Hidden Water. My grandfather was given this land by treaty in 1852. The government forgets its treaties, but the land remembers. He led the horses toward the cabin. Sarah followed, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in wonder. This place felt removed from the world, protected, ancient. The cliffs caught the last light and seemed to glow from within. Inside the cabin was simple but well-maintained. One main room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a single bedroom visible through an open door. Shelves held supplies, dried meat, beans, flour. Tools hung on pegs. A Winchester rifle identical to the one James carried stood propped in the corner. On one shelf, almost hidden, Sarah noticed a small carved doll. It was simple, rough, clearly handmade, a child's toy. James saw her looking and his expression closed. That was William's. Anna made it for him when he was 3. Sarah started to reach for it, then stopped. I am sorry, I did not mean to intrude. You are not intruding, James said, though his voice carried weight. This cabin has been silent for 4 years. Perhaps it is time for voices again. He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames crackled, driving back the evening chill. You will take the bed, James said. I sleep outside most nights. I prefer it. Sarah wanted to protest, but exhaustion was catching up with her. The day had been long, traumatic, overwhelming. Thank you, she said simply. James nodded. He opened a cabinet and withdrew jerky hardtack and a canteen of water. Simple food, but welcome. They ate in silence, sitting at the small table. The fire popped. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Finally, Sarah spoke. What happens tomorrow? James set down his cup. Tomorrow I begin teaching you to survive. Water, fire, shooting, basic skills. If Marcus sends men and he will, you need to be able to defend yourself. I have never shot a gun. You will learn. His certainty was absolute. Not arrogant, but assured. The confidence of a man who had taught survival before. Sarah studied him across the table. In the firelight, his features softened slightly. The harsh lines of his face relaxed. For a moment, she glimpsed the man he might have been before grief carved him down to essentials. You loved her very much, Sarah said. Anna. James was quiet so long she thought he would not respond. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. She was the best part of me. The part that believed in goodness and hope. When she died, that part died with her. What remains is what you see. Anger, purpose, the need to find my son. That is not all you are, Sarah said gently. You saved me today. That was more than anger or purpose. That was decency. James shook his head. I saved you despite Marcus. Do not make me into something I am not. And yet you gave me choices. You are giving me choices still. A man driven only by anger would not do that. He met her eyes then, and for a moment something unguarded passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. The understanding that they were both people defined by loss, trying to navigate a world that had taken too much. Get some sleep, James said, standing. Tomorrow will be difficult. Sarah rose and moved toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused. Muttered all eyes. Yes. Thank you for today, for this. He nodded once, then turned away to tend the fire. Sarah entered the bedroom and closed the door. The bed was simple, a frame with a thin mattress and wool blankets. But after the day she had endured, it felt like luxury. She removed her shoes, lay down fully clothed, and pulled the blanket over herself. Through the wall, she heard James moving about the main room. Then the cabin door opened and closed. She heard his footsteps receding. Sarah closed her eyes. Sleep should have come instantly. But her mind churned with the day's events. This morning she had been a prisoner of circumstance, a woman sold to the highest bidder. Tonight she lay in a hidden canyon protected by a man she barely knew, bound to him by the cruelest lottery imaginable. And yet impossibly she felt safer than she had in months. Outside under the vast Arizona sky, James Redstone stood beside the dying embers of a separate fire. He had not lied to Sarah. He did prefer sleeping outside. Walls felt like cages. Open sky felt like freedom. But tonight he did not sleep. He thought of Anna, her red hair catching sunlight. He thought of William, his son's small hand in his own. He thought of 4 years of searching, of dead ends and false hopes. And he thought of Sarah Bennett, who had survived degradation with dignity and tact, who had offered partnership when she could have demanded protection. She reminded him of Anna, not in appearance but in that core of strength that no circumstance could break. Tomorrow he would teach her to survive, to shoot, to track, to endure. Not because he wanted to, but because Marcus Webb would not let this rest. The banker had lost face today. Men like Marcus did not forgive such humiliation. War was coming. James knew it with the certainty of a man who had lived through too many wars already. Marcus would send men, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next week, but they would come. James needed Sarah ready, not just for her own survival, but because he realized with something like surprise that he did not want her to die. She was the first person in 4 years who had looked at him and seen a man rather than a savage or a ghost. That meant something. What exactly he could not yet name. But it meant something. He lay down on his bedroll, the Winchester beside him, and stared up at stars older than memory. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of fire and blood, and a child's voice calling for a father who could not save him. In the cabin, Sarah dreamed too. But her dreams were different. She dreamed of David, her husband, smiling as he read by lamplight. She dreamed of teaching children their letters. And strangely, she dreamed of red canyons and a man with eyes like winter teaching her to survive in a world that wanted her dead. When she woke just before dawn, she could not remember the last time she had slept without nightmares. The realization startled her. Perhaps against all odds and logic, she had finally found a place where she could breathe. Dawn came with the cry of a hawk and the scent of coffee. Sarah woke to unfamiliar sounds, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. Red Canyon, James Redstone, the lottery that had brought her here. She rose, dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, and emerged from the bedroom. The main room stood empty, but the fire burned fresh, and a tin cup of coffee waited on the table, still steaming. Outside, James worked near the corral. He had stripped to the waist in the morning heat, his muscled back showing more scars than Sarah had noticed before. He moved with efficient grace, checking the horses' hooves, ensuring water troughs were full. Sarah took her coffee and walked out to join him. He glanced up as she approached, nodded once, then returned to his work. There is bread and jerky inside, he said. Eat. Then training begins. Sarah sipped her coffee. It was strong black bitter. Perfect. What kind of training? Survival. Water fire shooting. The basics that keep you alive. He straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. Marcus will send men. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. When they come, you need to be ready. The certainty in his voice chilled Sarah more than the threat itself. He did not say if. He said when. How can you be sure? Because I know men like Marcus. He lost control of his own scheme yesterday. Lost face in front of the entire town. He will not forget that. He will punish it. James gestured toward the narrow canyon entrance. This place is defensible. One way in, one way out. But defense requires more than walls. It requires skill. Sarah set down her coffee cup. Then teach me. The next 5 days became a blur of exhaustion and incremental progress. James proved to be a demanding but patient teacher. He wasted no words, offered no false praise, but neither did he accept failure. On the first day, he taught Sarah about water. They walked to the spring's source hidden in rocks at the canyon's far end. He showed her how to identify clean water by color and smell, how to filter through cloth if necessary, how to store it in sealed containers to prevent contamination. In this country, he said, water is more valuable than gold. A man with water can survive anything. A man without it dies in 3 days. He made Sarah carry 2 wooden buckets from the spring to the cabin, a distance of perhaps a quarter mile. The buckets held 3 gallons each. Sarah's arms screamed, her hands blistered. She dropped the buckets twice, spilling precious water onto the dusty ground. Again, James said simply. By noon, Sarah had made the journey 4 times. Her hands bled, her shoulders burned, but she completed the task. James examined her hands, then disappeared into the cabin. He returned with a tin of salve plant-based smelling of sage. He took her hands gently and applied the salve to her blisters. Pain teaches, he said, but infection kills. Remember that. And the second day focused on fire. James provided flint, steel, and tinder. Then he destroyed Sarah's campfire and made her start again from nothing. She failed 20 times, her hands cramped. Sparks flew but would not catch. Tinder smoldered and died. On the 21st attempt, a flame flickered to life. Sarah had never felt such triumph. James, watching, allowed himself a small nod. Good, again. Make 10 fires in a row. When you can make fire without thinking, you will be ready. By evening, Sarah's hands were black with soot, but she had succeeded. 10 fires, each one faster than the last. The third day brought shooting lessons. James handed Sarah a Colt revolver, .45 caliber, the weight of it surprising in her palm. 6 rounds, he said. Single action. You must cock the hammer before each shot. Effective range is 50 yards, but you are unlikely to hit anything past 20. Aim for center mass, the torso. It is the largest target. He set up tin cans on rocks 20 yards distant. Sight down the barrel. Line up the front sight with the rear notch. Breathe out slowly. Squeeze the trigger, do not jerk it. Sarah's first shot went wild, kicking the revolver up and to the right. The noise startled her more than the recoil. Again. She fired 5 more times. Not a single can fell. James reloaded the revolver and handed it back. You are anticipating the recoil. Your body tenses before the shot. Relax. Trust the weapon. 50 rounds later, Sarah hit her first can. The metallic ping of success brought a smile to her face. James, standing behind her, spoke quietly. Hitting a can is one thing. Hitting a man who is shooting back is different. But you have the basics. That is enough to start. By the 5th day's end, after burning through 200 rounds of ammunition James had stockpiled, Sarah could hit 7 out of 10 targets at 20 yards. Not perfect, but competent. James had her practice shooting from prone position from behind cover with her heart racing from running. He made her shoot until her hands cramped, until pulling the trigger became as natural as breathing. In battle, James said, you will not have time to think. Your body must know what to do. Sarah's body learned. The 4th day introduced hunting and tracking. James showed Sarah how to read the ground, how to distinguish deer tracks from elk, how to identify fresh scat from old. They tracked a rabbit for 2 hours through scrub and rock. When they finally found it, James handed Sarah the rifle. 1 shot, Make it count. Sarah's hands trembled as she aimed. The rabbit sat motionless, unaware. She pulled the trigger. The shot went high, startling the rabbit into flight. Sarah lowered the rifle, disappointed. You hesitated, James observed. You thought about killing it rather than simply doing it. That hesitation cost you the shot. They tracked another rabbit. This time Sarah fired without thinking. The rabbit fell. Then she saw what she had done. The small body still twitching. Blood on brown fur. Life ended by her hand. She turned away and vomited. James waited until she finished, then handed her his canteen. The first kill is always hard, he said. It should be. The day it becomes easy is the day you lose your humanity. But you must be able to do it when necessary. He picked up the rabbit. We will eat well tonight because of your skill. Thank the animal. Honor its sacrifice. That is the Apache way. The fifth day focused on hand-to-hand combat. James taught Sarah moves that had nothing to do with honor or fairness. How to gouge eyes. How to strike the throat. How to use her smaller size as an advantage, slipping inside a larger opponent's reach. There is no such thing as fighting dirty, James said. There is only winning and dying. Choose winning. They sparred slowly at first, then faster. James pulled his strikes, of course, but Sarah learned quickly. On her 11th attempt to grapple him, she used a trick he had taught her. She feinted left, then dropped low and kicked his knee. James went down genuinely surprised. Then for the first time since they met, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if his voice had forgotten how. But it was genuine. Smart, he said, standing and rubbing his knee. Deception is a weapon. Use it. Sarah found herself smiling too. It felt strange, this moment of levity in the midst of survival training, but it felt good. That evening they sat by the fire and ate the rabbit Sarah had killed. The meat was lean, gamey, delicious. They ate in comfortable silence. Finally Sarah spoke. I never knew I was capable of these things. James poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night. You always were. You simply never needed to know it. The world you lived in allowed you to be soft. This world does not. Is that what happened to you? The world made you hard. James considered the question. The world took everything I loved. What remains is what could not be taken. Strength, skill, will, but also, yes, hardness. When you lose enough, you build walls to protect what little remains. Sarah watched him across the flames. What remains for you besides finding William? James was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. I do not know anymore. For 4 years, finding William has been everything. If I find him, what then? He will not remember me. 4 years is a lifetime for a child. I may be a stranger to him. But you are his father. Biology does not make a father. Presence does. I was not present. Someone else raised him, taught him, held him when he cried. I failed him. Sarah heard the grief beneath his words, the guilt that drove him harder than any anger. You did not fail him. The government failed him. Marcus Webb failed him. You have been searching for 4 years. That is not failure. James shook his head. Words are kind. Reality is not. If I find William and he does not know me, then I have been chasing a ghost. My grief, not my son. The boy he was is gone. The boy he is belongs to someone else now. Sarah had no answer for that. The pain in his voice was too raw, too true. So she simply sat with him in silence, two people bound by loss, finding something like solace in shared understanding. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky. The fire burned low. And in Dry Creek, 25 miles away, Marcus Webb sat in his office and plotted revenge. On the 7th morning, Sarah woke to thunder, not the distant rumble of summer storms, but the sharp crack of hoofbeats on stone. She bolted upright, reaching instinctively for the revolver James had given her. It lay on the bedside table, loaded within arm's reach. He had insisted. Through the cabin's small window, she saw James already moving toward the canyon entrance, Winchester in hand. His posture carried tension she had not seen during their days of training. This was different. This was danger. Sarah dressed quickly and emerged from the cabin. The morning air felt heavy, oppressive. Dark clouds gathered over the canyon rim, threatening the first rain in months, but James's attention was fixed on the narrow passage, on the sound of an approaching horse. A single rider emerged from the shadows between the cliffs. A woman riding a tired mule, her dress torn and dusty. As she drew closer, Sarah's breath caught. Ruth Miller. James did not lower his rifle. He waited patient and still as the stones around them until Ruth brought her mule to a halt 30 yards distant. She raised her hands, showing them empty. "I am alone," Ruth called out. "Please, I need to speak with Sarah." James glanced back at Sarah, who had stepped out of the cabin. His expression asked the question without words. Friend or threat, Sarah's emotions warred. Ruth had been her closest friend since childhood. But Ruth had also stood silent during the lottery, had done nothing while Sarah was degraded and sold. Trust did not come easily anymore. Still, Ruth had come alone, exhausted, clearly frightened. That meant something. "Let her approach," Sarah said. James lowered the rifle slightly, but kept it ready. Ruth dismounted and walked forward slowly, leading the mule. As she came closer, Sarah saw the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands. This was not the confident Ruth she remembered. This was a woman carrying guilt like stones. "Sarah," Ruth said, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I should have done something. I should have spoken up. I was a coward." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. The anger she had suppressed for 7 days rose hot in her chest. "You were more than a coward. You were complicit. You stood there and watched while they sold me like cattle." Ruth flinched as if struck. Tears streamed down her face. "I know, you are right. I have no excuse, but please, you have to understand. Marcus threatened my son. He said if I did not cooperate, if I caused any trouble, he would ensure Tommy died. My boy was sick, Sarah. He needed a doctor. I had no money. Marcus offered to pay if I just stayed quiet." She dropped to her knees in the dust. "I am not asking for forgiveness. I do not deserve it, but I came to warn you. Marcus is planning something. He is furious about what happened. He has hired men, gunmen from Tombstone. I heard him talking with Mr. Harrison from the railroad. They need this canyon, Sarah. They need the land, and they are willing to kill for it." James stepped forward, his shadow falling over Ruth. When his voice was flat, emotionless. Ruth looked up at him, seeing truly for the first time the man Sarah had been sold to. Whatever she had expected, it was not the controlled intensity radiating from James Redstone. "I do not know exactly. Soon, maybe days. Marcus is gathering men. He told Thomas Gray to scout this canyon to find weaknesses." At Thomas's name, something flickered across James's face. Not surprise, but recognition. He had known Thomas would be involved. "Thomas Gray," James said slowly. "He was there, the day Anna died. He was the one who shot me." Ruth paled. "I did not know. Sarah, I swear I did not know the details." Sarah walked forward and helped Ruth to her feet. Despite her anger, despite the betrayal, she saw genuine remorse in her friend's eyes. And beneath that fear, real bone-deep fear. "Why are you really here, Ruth? Marcus paid you once. Why risk his anger now?" Ruth met Sarah's gaze. "Because my son is safe now. The doctor cured him. And because I realized that some prices are too high to pay. Marcus wanted me to come here to convince you to return. He thought you would listen to me, trust me. He was wrong. You have no reason to trust me. But I am not his messenger. I am here to warn you, to beg you to prepare, because what is coming will be terrible." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Sarah. "I copied this from Marcus's desk. It is a contract with the railroad. They are offering him $15,000 to clear this canyon for a road. 15,000, Sarah. He will kill for that much money. He will kill everyone." Sarah unfolded the paper. The letterhead read, Southern Pacific Railroad Company. The contract signed by a Mr. Harrison promised exactly what Ruth had said. Payment for cleared land suitable for rail construction. James read over Sarah's shoulder. His jaw tightened. "They want a railroad through Red Canyon." "Yes," Ruth said, "and they do not care how it happens. They want it done quietly. No federal attention, no newspaper stories, just results." She turned to James. "I know you have no reason to trust me either. But please believe this. Thomas Gray is not like the other men Marcus hired. Thomas has been drinking heavily since he returned from scouting this canyon. He keeps saying something about Anna, about a debt he can never repay. I do not understand what he means, but he seems torn. The other men, they are killers. But Thomas, I think he might be convinced to help you. James's expression remained unreadable. Thomas Gray helped kill my wife and steal my son. There is no redemption for that. Maybe not, Ruth said quietly, but maybe there is a choice between being a killer and being something else. That is all any of us have. Choices. Silence fell. Thunder rumbled again, closer now. The storm was building. Sarah looked at James, then at Ruth. Two people from her past life, one now bound to her by circumstance, the other seeking forgiveness she was not sure she could give. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked Ruth. "Go back to Dry Creek. Care for my son. And when Marcus asks what happened, I will tell him you refused to return. He will be angry. He might throw me out of my house, but I will survive. I always have." Ruth remounted her mule, then paused. "Sarah, I know I do not deserve to ask this, but if you survive what is coming, if you and this man build something here, remember that not everyone in Dry Creek is like Marcus. Some of us are just trying to survive in a world that gives us few choices." Sarah nodded slowly. Forgiveness would take time, but understanding that could begin now. "Be careful, Ruth. Marcus is dangerous." "I know, but so are you now. I can see it. You are not the same woman who stood on that platform 7 days ago. You have changed." Ruth kicked her mule into motion and rode back toward the canyon entrance. Sarah and James watched her disappear into the narrow passage. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, James turned to Sarah. "She is right. They are coming. Soon, we need to prepare." But before they could move, the first drops of rain began to fall. Within seconds, it became a deluge. The monsoon Marcus had been hoping would drive them out had finally arrived. And with it came the storm that would either break them or forge them into something stronger. The rain fell with the violence of a grudge finally settled. It hammered the canyon floor, turning dust to mud in moments. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the red cliffs in stark white flashes. Thunder followed so loud it seemed the earth itself was tearing apart. James and Sarah ran for the cabin. By the time they reached the door, both were soaked through. Water streamed from James's hair. Sarah's dress clung to her frame, heavy and cold. Inside, James immediately began securing the cabin. He checked the shutters, ensuring they were latched tight. He moved the supplies away from potential leaks. He built up the fire, knowing they would need warmth and light. Sarah stood dripping by the door, watching him work. In the week they had spent together, she had learned to read his moods by the set of his shoulders, the speed of his movements. Right now, every gesture carried urgency. He was preparing for more than just a storm. "The rain will make it harder for them to attack." James set his back to her as he stoked the fire. "But not impossible. If anything, they might use it as cover. We need to set up defenses now before the ground becomes too muddy. In this weather, especially in this weather, rain makes men careless. They seek shelter, they hurry, they make mistakes. But it also hides sound, hides movement. Marcus's men could be at the canyon entrance right now, and we would not hear them coming." He turned to face her finally. Water dripped from his hair onto his bare shoulders. In the firelight, his scars stood out in sharp relief. Not just the battle scars she had noticed before, but older marks. Ceremonial marks, she realized. Apache symbols carved into his skin as a young man. "You need to change," he said. "Dry clothes, wet fabric will steal your body heat. Hypothermia kills as surely as a bullet." Sarah nodded and moved toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused. "James, what Ruth said about Thomas Gray, do you think it is true that he might help us?" James's expression hardened. "Thomas Gray was there when my father died. He was there when Anna died. He has blood on his hands that no amount of regret can wash away. I do not care if his conscience torments him. I care that he is likely leading the men who will try to kill us. But if he is conflicted, if he could be turned—" "Do not trust him," James said flatly. "He will hesitate perhaps. But when the moment comes, he will follow orders. Men like Thomas always do. That is how they survive." Sarah wanted to argue, to suggest that people could change, that redemption was possible. But the look in James's eyes stopped her. He had lost too much to believe in second chances. She changed into dry clothes, simple pants, and a shirt James had given her from Anna's old belongings. They fit reasonably well, though Anna had been taller. As Sarah pulled on the shirt, she noticed embroidery at the collar. Small flowers, delicately stitched. Anna's handiwork, probably. A reminder that the woman who had died had also lived, had created beauty, had been more than just a victim. When Sarah emerged, James had changed as well. He wore buckskin pants and a dark shirt. His hair, still wet, hung loose past his shoulders. He looked like what he was, a warrior preparing for battle. But his eyes, when they met Sarah's, held something other than warrior's cold calculation. Concern for her. "The worst of the storm will last hours," he said. "We should eat, rest, but stay ready. If they come in the rain, they will come fast." They ate cold jerky and hardtack by the fire. The storm raged outside, a constant roar punctuated by thunder. Rain leaked through 2 spots in the roof, despite James's repairs. He positioned buckets to catch the drips. Sarah found herself watching him as he moved about the cabin. In the past week, this man had become familiar to her. Not comfortable exactly. James carried too much danger for comfort, but familiar. She knew his silences, his rare smiles, his patient teaching voice. She knew the way he checked his weapons 3 times before sleeping. She knew he had nightmares but never spoke of them. And she was beginning to care what happened to him. The realization startled her. 7 days ago, she had been married to David's memory, devoted to a ghost. Now, watching James check the Winchester's action for the 3rd time, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not love. It was too soon for that, too complicated. But connection, partnership, the beginning of something that might, given time, become more. A particularly violent crack of thunder made Sarah jump. James looked up from his rifle maintenance and saw her tension. "The storm frightens you." It was not a question. "I have always hated thunder," Sarah admitted. "When I was a child, I would hide under my bed during storms. David used to read to me during bad weather to distract me." She smiled sadly at the memory. "He would read Shakespeare, sonnets mostly. His voice made me feel safe." James set down the rifle and moved to sit across from her at the table. The fire between them cast moving shadows on his face. "Anna sang during storms," he said quietly. Apache songs her grandmother had taught her. She said storms were the earth cleansing itself. The lightning was sacred fire. The thunder was drums celebrating renewal. You must miss her terribly. Every moment of every day for 4 years, but the missing changes. At first it was sharp, like a knife in my chest with each breath. Now it is dull, an ache that never quite leaves. I can function around it, but it is always there." Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him deliberately outside of training. His hand was warm, calloused, strong. "I understand," she said. "David has been gone 6 months. The sharpness is fading, but I feel guilty about that, as if forgetting the pain means forgetting him." James turned his hand over, clasping hers gently. "The dead would not want us to suffer forever. Anna told me once near the end that if anything happened to her, I should live. Not just survive, but live. I did not understand what she meant then. I think I am beginning to understand now." Their eyes met across the table. The fire crackled. Rain hammered the roof. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Permission, perhaps. Permission to move forward, to feel something other than grief, to imagine a future that included joy. James lifted his other hand and brushed a strand of wet hair from Sarah's face. His touch was gentle, questioning. Sarah leaned into it slightly, her breath catching. "Sarah," James said, his voice rough, "I need you to know something. What happened 7 days ago, the lottery, it was not your choice. You are here because you had nowhere else to go, because I offered protection. But that is all I offered. I will not take advantage of your situation. I will not assume you feel anything beyond gratitude or partnership." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She could feel the calluses on his palm, the warmth of his hand against her cheek. "What if I feel more than that?" James's eyes widened slightly. For a man who showed so little emotion, the surprise was profound. "You do not know what you are saying. 7 days is not enough time to..." "To what?" "To know my own feelings, James. I have spent a week learning to survive from you, learning to shoot, to fight, to stand on my own feet. But I have also been learning about you, your patience, your honor, the way you grieve but keep moving forward. I do not love you. It is too soon for that. But I care about you, and I want to know if that caring might become something more." James's jaw worked. His hand trembled slightly against her face. I want that too, he admitted. But I am afraid. Afraid to care again, afraid to lose again. Everyone I have ever loved has been taken from me. My father, Anna, William. I do not know if I can survive losing someone else. Then do not think about losing, Sarah said softly. Think about having, about the possibility that we might survive this, that we might find William, that we might build something worth protecting. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in harsh white light. For a moment, James's face was perfectly visible, every line of pain and longing etched clear. Then darkness returned, leaving only firelight. James leaned forward slowly, giving Sarah time to pull away. She did not. His lips met hers, gentle at first, then deeper. The kiss tasted of rain and grief and the desperate hope of two people who had forgotten how to want anything beyond survival. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sarah's hand had moved to James's shoulder, gripping tight. His hand had slid to the back of her neck, fingers tangled in her hair. I cannot promise you anything, James said, his forehead resting against hers. Not until William is found. Not until Marcus is dealt with. But I can promise you this. Whatever happens, you will not face it alone. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She had not realized how much she needed to hear those words. How much she needed to know that someone saw her, chose her, wanted her for reasons beyond convenience. They sat like that for a long time, foreheads touching, hands clasped while the storm raged outside. It was not the romance of stories or songs. It was something raw or more real. Two broken people finding solace in shared warmth, shared understanding, shared determination to survive. Eventually, James pulled back, his practical nature reasserting itself. The storm will pass by morning. When it does, they may come. We need to rest now while we can. Sarah nodded. She returned to the bedroom while James checked the perimeter one final time. But before she closed the door, she looked back at him. James. Yes. Thank you for seeing me, for trusting me with your grief. He met her eyes across the cabin. Thank you for reminding me I am still capable of feeling something other than anger. Sarah closed the door and lay down on the bed, but sleep did not come easily. Her lips still tingled from the kiss. Her mind replayed the conversation, the admission of mutual feeling, the fragile hope that had bloomed between them. Outside, James stood in the doorway watching the rain. He touched his lips, still feeling the ghost of Sarah's kiss. 4 years. 4 years of numbness, of existing but not living. And now impossibly he felt alive again. But with that feeling came fear. Because he knew with grim certainty that Marcus Webb would not let this stand. The banker would come with violence in numbers. And when he did, James would have to choose between protecting Sarah and searching for William, unless he could find a way to do both. The storm began to ease as midnight approached. The rain softened to a steady drizzle. Thunder rumbled in the distance, moving east. James finally allowed himself to rest lying on his bedroll by the fire, the Winchester within arm's reach. He dreamed of Anna, but for the first time in 4 years, the dream was not a nightmare. Anna stood in sunlight, smiling. She said nothing, but her presence felt like permission, like blessing. James woke before dawn to the sound of horses. Multiple horses moving through mud, trying and failing to be quiet. They had come. James was on his feet with the Winchester in hand before he was fully conscious. Years of survival had taught him to wake ready for violence. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the shutters. 4 riders approached through the pre-dawn gloom. They moved cautiously, spread out, weapons drawn. Even through the dim light and residual mist from the storm, James recognized the lead rider. Thomas Gray. Behind Thomas came 3 men James did not know. Hard men by their posture and movement. Gunfighters, probably from Tombstone, as Ruth had warned. They wore range clothes but carried themselves like soldiers. Professionals. James moved to the bedroom door and knocked softly. Sarah, they are here. He heard her rise immediately, heard the metallic click of her revolver being checked. She emerged dressed and ready, her face pale but composed. How many? 4. Thomas Gray and 3 hired guns. There may be more watching the canyon entrance. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she showed no panic. The week of training had prepared her mentally as well as physically. What do we do? James considered. 4 against 2 were not good odds, but the canyon offered advantages. Choke points, cover, familiarity with terrain. We make them come to us. Fight from cover. Do not waste ammunition. Aim for the horses first if you can. A man on foot is slower, easier to track. He handed Sarah the spare Winchester from the wall. Remember what I taught you. Breathe, squeeze, do not jerk. And if you must kill, do it without hesitation. Hesitation gets you killed. Sarah took the rifle, her hand steady. She met his eyes. I am ready. James felt a surge of pride. 7 days ago, Sarah had been a schoolteacher who had never fired a gun. Now she stood ready to defend her life with grim determination. She had become what this land required, a survivor. The riders stopped 200 yards from the cabin. Thomas Gray raised his hand, calling for halt. He sat his horse for a long moment, seeming to gather courage, then called out, James Redstone, I am Thomas Gray. Marcus Webb sent us to bring Sarah Bennett back to Dry Creek. Come out peacefully, and no one needs to die today. James opened the cabin door slightly and shouted back, Sarah Bennett stays here by her own choice. Leave now and you will live to see tomorrow. One of the hired guns laughed, a harsh sound, carrying clear in the morning air. There are 4 of us, Indian. You are outnumbered. This does not need to be hard. James's response was to fire the Winchester, once the bullet kicking up dirt 5 feet in front of the man who had spoken. The shot echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying into thunder. The next one will not miss. Leave. The hired guns looked at Thomas, waiting for orders. Thomas's face was conflicted, visible even at this distance. He did not want to be here, but he was here nonetheless, trapped by debt and poor choices. We have our orders, Redstone, Thomas called. Marcus will not let this go, and the railroad wants this land. You cannot win. I do not need to win, James shouted back. I just need to make victory cost more than it is worth. How much is Marcus paying you, Thomas, enough to die for? Thomas did not answer. Instead, he gestured to his men. They began to spread out, trying to circle the cabin from different angles. It was a sound tactic: create multiple threats, divide the defenders' attention. James had expected this. He had spent 4 years learning this canyon, every rock, every shadow. He knew where men would ride, where they would take cover. And he had prepared. Sarah, there are tripwires 50 feet out on the north and east sides. When they cross them, bells will ring. That is your warning. Cover the east approach. I will take north and west. Sarah moved to a window facing east and shouldered her rifle. Her heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She thought of David, of the life stolen from her. She thought of James and William and all the things Marcus Webb had destroyed in his pursuit of profit. And she thought with grim satisfaction that Marcus had made a mistake underestimating what she had become. The first rider, one of the hired guns, approached from the east. He rode slowly, scanning for threats. His horse picked its way through rocks and mud, nervous after the storm. Then the bell rang. The sound was small but clear, a simple cowbell tied to a wire James had strung at ankle height. The horse reared slightly, startled. The rider cursed and looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Sarah sighted down the Winchester's barrel, not at the man, but at his horse's foreleg. She breathed out slowly, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked. The horse screamed and went down, its legs shattered. The rider tumbled, hitting the mud hard. He scrambled to his feet, limping, and dove behind a boulder. Sarah had drawn first blood. On the north side, another bell rang. James fired twice in quick succession. The first shot missed. The second struck the rider in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground and did not move. 2 down effectively. 2 still mobile. Thomas Gray and the remaining gunmen pulled back, seeking cover behind a cluster of large rocks 70 yards out. They had underestimated the defenders. Now they were reassessing. James used the lull to reload. Beside him, Sarah did the same, her fingers working automatically through the motions he had drilled into her. Load chamber ready, again and again until it became muscle memory. You are doing well, James said quietly. I shot a horse. The man is still alive. The horse was the right target. An injured man and a dead horse are out of the fight. You succeeded. From behind the rocks, Thomas's voice carried across the distance. Redstone, this is madness. More men are coming. Marcus has 8 more hired guns arriving today. You cannot hold out against 12 men. James's jaw tightened. 12 men. Those were not good odds, even with defensive advantages. But before he could respond, a 5th horse appeared at the canyon entrance. A single rider coming fast. For a moment, James feared reinforcements had arrived early. Then he recognized the rider. Ruth Miller. She rode hard, her mule pushed to its limits. As she approached Thomas's position, she shouted something James could not quite hear. Thomas emerged from cover, clearly shocked to see her. Ruth dismounted and grabbed Thomas's arm, speaking urgently. James could not hear the words, but he saw Thomas's body language change. Saw the man's shoulders slump, saw him shake his head repeatedly. Then Ruth pointed toward the cabin and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. Anna saved your life, Thomas Gray. She pulled rattlesnake venom from your blood when anyone else would have let you die. And this is how you repay that debt, by killing her husband. The words hit like physical blows. Thomas staggered back. The remaining gunmen looked confused, uncertain whether to shoot this woman who had appeared from nowhere. Ruth pressed her advantage. I know what you did at Turret Peak, Thomas. I know you killed James's father. I found the records in Marcus's office. You have carried that guilt for 7 years. How much more blood will you spill before you find the courage to stop? Thomas's face had gone gray. He looked toward the cabin, toward James, and for the first time James saw something other than conflict in the man's eyes. He saw recognition and shame. I did not know, Thomas called out, his voice breaking. I did not know Black Eagle was your father until years later. I was following orders. I was a soldier. So was every man who has ever committed atrocity, James shouted back. Orders do not absolve you, Thomas Gray, but choices do. You can choose to be more than a killer. You can choose to repay the debt you owe Anna. Thomas stood frozen, a man caught between past and present, between guilt and redemption. The hired gunman beside him grew impatient. What are you waiting for? The gunman snarled. We came to do a job. Let us do it. Thomas's hand moved toward his own rifle, then stopped. He looked at the cabin, at James Redstone standing beside the woman he had fought to protect. He thought of Anna's face as she pulled the venom from his blood, her gentle hands, her soft voice saying, life is precious. He thought of Black Eagle falling, of the screams of women and children at Turret Peak, of 4 years carrying guilt like stones. The gunman raised his rifle, aiming toward the cabin. Thomas moved without thinking. His hands shot out, pushing the rifle barrel down. The gunman turned, surprised and angry. What the hell are you doing? I am done, Thomas said quietly. I am done killing for Marcus Webb. I am done adding to debts I can never repay. The gunman's face twisted with rage. You coward. You! He never finished. Thomas's fist caught him in the jaw, dropping him like a stone. The man crumpled unconscious. Ruth grabbed Thomas's shoulder, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you. Thomas looked at her, then back at the cabin. Redstone, he called. I am leaving. I am taking these men with me. But Marcus will not stop. He has too much money riding on this. He will bring more men, more guns. You need to know what you are facing. James stepped out of the cabin, Winchester still ready. Sarah appeared beside him, her rifle trained on Thomas. Tell me. Thomas took a deep breath. Marcus signed a contract with the Southern Pacific Railroad. They want a route through Red Canyon. It will save them 40 miles and $200,000. Marcus gets $15,000 for clearing the land, plus contracts for timber and labor. He plans to be governor one day. This is his path to power. He paused. And there is more. Your son, William. Marcus told me he sold the boy to a rancher in New Mexico, Fort Stanton area, a man named Jeremiah Clayton. Clayton runs cattle and needed workers. He paid $50 for an Apache apprentice. Marcus handled the paperwork. James felt the world tilt. 4 years of searching, and the answer had been this close. Fort Stanton. Are you certain? I heard Marcus tell Harrison myself. Clayton Ranch 10 miles north of the fort. That is all I know. I swear it. James's hand shook slightly on the rifle. William, his son, was alive, had a location could be found. Sarah put her hand on his arm, steadying him. Thomas mounted his horse. I am taking these men back to Dry Creek. I will tell Marcus the canyon is too well defended, that it is not worth the cost. It will buy you time, maybe a few days. Use it. Find your son. Leave this place before Marcus returns with an army. He looked at Ruth. Come with me. Marcus will punish you for this. It is not safe. Ruth shook her head. No, I am staying here. Sarah needs help preparing for what is coming, and I have amends to make. Thomas nodded slowly, then looked one final time at James. I cannot undo what I did. Cannot bring back your father or your wife. But I can give you this. Your son's location and time. Use them both. He rode toward the downed men, gathering them up. One wounded one, unconscious one with a lamed horse. Thomas helped them onto his horse and the remaining mount, then led them slowly toward the canyon exit. As he passed the cabin, he paused. Anna was a good woman. She deserved better than what this world gave her. I hope you find your boy Redstone. I hope he makes everything you have endured worth it. Then he was gone, disappearing into the narrow passage with his broken band. James stood motionless, processing everything. Sarah kept her hand on his arm, an anchor in the storm of emotions. Ruth approached cautiously, her mule trailing behind. I brought supplies, she said. Ammunition, food, medicine, everything I could carry, and I brought something else. She reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a leather journal. Marcus's record book. I stole it before I left. It has everything. Land deals, bribes, names of officials he owns. If you survive this, if you take this to the territorial governor, Marcus Webb will hang. Sarah took the journal, her hands trembling slightly. This was more than evidence. It was justice. Proof of every crime Marcus had committed, including David's murder. James finally found his voice. Why are you doing this? Ruth, you have a son. If Marcus discovers what you have done, he will destroy you. Ruth met his eyes without flinching. Because my son deserves to grow up in a world where men like Marcus do not have power. And because Sarah is my friend. I abandoned her once. I will not do it again. She turned to Sarah. I know I do not deserve forgiveness, but I can fight. I can shoot. My father taught me before he died. Let me help you. Let me earn back even a fraction of what I lost when I stayed silent. Sarah looked at James, questioning. He nodded slowly. If Marcus brings 12 men, we will need every gun we can get. And if you are here when they arrive, you are dead anyway. Better to die fighting than waiting for execution. Ruth smiled grimly. Then teach me what you taught Sarah. Turn me into someone who can stand against monsters. Sarah embraced her friend, forgiveness unspoken but present. We have 3 days at most, Sarah said. Maybe less. We use that time to prepare. We fortify this canyon until it becomes a fortress. And if Marcus wants this land, he will have to pay for it in blood and bodies. James looked at the two women, so different from each other, yet united by trauma and determination. 7 days ago, Sarah had been a victim. Now she stood ready to lead a defense. Ruth had been a coward. Now she offered her life in restitution. People changed, sometimes in ways that mattered. Then we begin now, James said, because when Marcus comes, he will come with everything he has, and we will be ready. The sun rose over Red Canyon, burning away the last of the storm clouds. In the distance, thunder rumbled. But it was not weather. It was the sound of 12 horses riding hard toward vengeance. The next 3 days became a blur of frantic preparation. James worked with military precision, turning the small cabin and surrounding area into a defensive position. He had learned tactics from his time as a cavalry scout, had seen both successful and failed defenses. Now he applied every lesson to Red Canyon. On the first day they dug, James marked positions for rifle pits, shallow trenches that would provide cover, while allowing clear fields of fire. Sarah and Ruth took turns with the shovel, their hands blistering, muscles screaming. But by nightfall, 3 pits surrounded the cabin at 40 yards out, forming a triangle of overlapping coverage. James also strung more wire, creating trip lines that would warn of any approach. He attached tin cans filled with pebbles to the wires. Any disturbance would create noise, alerting the defenders. On the second day, they moved rocks. Large stones were positioned to create barriers, forcing any attackers into kill zones, where they would be exposed to fire from multiple angles. It was back-breaking labor. Sarah's shoulders ached. Ruth's hands bled, but they did not stop. James taught them about fields of fire, about creating overlapping coverage so that no area could be approached without crossing at least 2 shooters' aim. He made them practice moving between positions, learning the routes by heart so they could relocate quickly under fire. That evening, as they rested by the fire, James gave them each a weapon to master. Sarah kept the Winchester she had used. Ruth received a double-barreled shotgun, 12 gauge, loaded with buckshot. You will not hit anything past 20 yards with this, James told Ruth. But inside 20 yards, you do not need to aim precisely. Point and fire. The spread will do the work. This is a weapon for close defense for when they breach the outer line. He showed her how to reload quickly, how to break the action, eject spent, shells insert fresh ones, snap it closed. Ruth practiced until her fingers moved automatically until she could reload without looking, counting seconds. Under 8 seconds, James said when Ruth completed her 10th reload. That will save your life. On the third day, they worked on strategy. James drew maps in the dirt, showing how 12 men would likely attack. They would try to surround the cabin, create crossfire, force the defenders to split their attention. Our advantage is that they must come through the canyon entrance, James explained. Single file for the first 200 yards. That is where we hit them first. Take down the leaders. Create chaos before they can spread out. He looked at Sarah and Ruth. When the fighting starts, do not think. Thinking gets you killed. React. Trust your training. And remember, we are not trying to kill 12 men. We are trying to convince 12 men that killing us costs more than they are willing to pay. Sarah understood. It was psychological warfare as much as physical. Make the cost high enough, brutal enough, and even paid killers might reconsider. That night, Ruth asked the question they had all been avoiding. What if we cannot hold? What if they overwhelm us? James was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. There is a back way out of this canyon. Very narrow, barely passable. Only I know it exists. If we are overrun, we run. We take the horses, take what supplies we can carry, and we disappear into the Gila wilderness. They cannot follow us there. I know that country. They do not. He looked at Sarah. If that happens, we go to Fort Stanton. We find William. We take Ruth's evidence to the territorial governor, and we let the law handle Marcus Webb. And if the law will not act, Sarah asked. James's eyes grew cold. Then I will handle Marcus Webb myself. No one questioned what that meant. They had all seen enough of James Redstone to know he was capable of lethal violence when necessary. That he had restrained that violence was a choice, not a limitation. On the fourth morning, they woke to silence. The kind of silence that precedes violence. The canyon seemed to hold its breath. James stood at the window watching the entrance. The sun had just cleared the eastern rim, casting long shadows. Perfect light for an attack. Attackers coming from the west would have the sun at their backs. Defenders would be partially blinded. Marcus had chosen his moment well. They are coming, James said quietly. Today. Sarah and Ruth checked their weapons one final time. Winchester, shotgun, revolvers as backup, ammunition distributed, water positioned, everything ready. Ruth looked at Sarah, her face pale but determined. If I die today, I want you to know something. You were the best friend I ever had, and I am sorry I failed you when you needed me most. Sarah embraced her. You are here now. That is what matters. They took their positions, James in the rifle pit facing the entrance with clear sight lines down the narrow passage. Sarah in the second pit covering the north approach once attackers spread out. Ruth in the third covering the south. And they waited. The sun climbed, heat built, sweat trickled down Sarah's back. Her hands gripped the Winchester so tightly her knuckles went white. Then they heard it. The sound of many horses moving through stone. The jingle of tack. The low murmur of men's voices. Marcus Webb had brought his army. 12 riders emerged from the canyon passage like cavalry from hell. They rode in formation, disciplined weapons ready. These were not cowboys or miners. These were professional fighters, men who killed for money and felt nothing afterward. Marcus Webb rode at their center, recognizable by his expensive suit and the fury etched into his features. Beside him rode a tall man in black twin revolvers on his hips, a gunfighter, clearly the leader of the hired men. They stopped 100 yards from the cabin, spreading out into a line. Marcus stood in his stirrups, his voice carrying clear and hard. James Redstone, Sarah Bennett, your resistance is over. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. Come out now, and I will show mercy. Stay inside, and you will burn. James did not respond. He sighted down his Winchester at the man in black waiting. Marcus continued, I have 12 men with me. Professional soldiers, you cannot win this fight. Surrender Sarah Bennett, and I will let you live. Redstone, keep her, and you both die. You have 1 minute to decide. Sarah from her position felt rage burn cold in her chest. Even now, Marcus spoke of her as property, as something to be negotiated and exchanged. The days when such language could shame her were gone. Now it only fueled her determination. The minute passed. James still did not answer. Marcus's face reddened with frustration. So be it. You have chosen death. He gestured to the gunfighter who raised his hand. The 12 men split into 4 groups of 3, beginning to circle the cabin from different directions. It was textbook military tactics. Divide, surround, overwhelm. James waited until the first group crossed the trip line. Cans rattled. The men looked down, confused by the sound. James fired. The lead rider went down, shot through the chest. He tumbled from his horse dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 men in his group scattered, seeking cover behind rocks. Sarah fired next, her Winchester barking twice. She aimed for horses as James had taught her. One animal screamed and went down its rider, pinned beneath thrashing weight. The second shot missed but came close enough to spook another horse into bolting. Ruth's shotgun roared, catching one attacker at 15 yards. The man's chest exploded in red spray. He dropped without a sound. In the space of 10 seconds, the coordinated attack became chaos. Men dove for cover. Horses reared and fled. One rider, trying to control his panicked mount, rode straight into James's line of fire and took a bullet in the shoulder. Marcus screamed orders, but his men were scattered, disorganized, no longer following any plan. The gunfighter in black kept his composure. He dismounted calmly, taking cover behind a large boulder, and began firing methodically at James's position. His shots came fast and accurate, forcing James to duck. "He is good," James muttered, impressed despite himself. "Stay low. He is trying to pin me while the others advance." Sarah saw 2 men circling toward her position, using rocks for cover, advancing by bounds. She waited until they were both visible, then fired twice rapidly. The first shot hit one man in the leg. He went down screaming. The second shot missed, but close enough to drive the other man back into cover. The wounded man crawled behind a rock, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. Ruth's shotgun thundered again. Sarah could not see her target, but heard a man's scream followed by cursing. A hit then, or at least close enough to wound. The battle settled into a grinding exchange. The attackers could not advance without exposing themselves to fire from multiple angles, but neither could the defenders leave their positions without being shot. Stalemate, except Marcus had more men, more ammunition, and time. James knew this. He also knew that a stalemate favored the side with more resources. They needed to break the deadlock, create an opportunity to inflict enough damage that Marcus would retreat. He studied the battlefield. Most of Marcus's men had taken cover in a cluster of rocks 40 yards out. The gunfighter still fired from his position, keeping James pinned. But there was a gap in their line, a stretch of open ground that would give James a flanking angle if he could reach it. Risky. He would be exposed for 10 seconds of sprinting, 10 seconds of hell, but it might work. "Sarah," he shouted, "I'm moving. Cover the black rock position." "James, no, that is suicide. Trust me." Before she could argue further, James exploded from his pit, running low and fast. Sarah immediately fired at the gunfighter's position, keeping his head down. Ruth, understanding the plan, opened up with both barrels of her shotgun at the men clustered in the rocks. James sprinted across open ground, his heart hammering, expecting at any second to feel the impact of a bullet. He dove behind a low stone wall, sliding to a stop, and immediately brought the Winchester up. From this new angle, he could see into the rock cluster where 5 men had taken cover. They were exposed to him, not expecting fire from this direction. James fired 4 times in rapid succession. 2 men went down, a third took a bullet in the arm and staggered back, dropping his rifle. The remaining 2 scrambled for new cover, one of them not making it. Sarah's shot caught him mid-stride, spinning him to the ground. In less than 15 seconds, James had turned the tide. Of the 12 men who had attacked, at least 6 were down, dead, wounded, or combat ineffective. The gunfighter in black realized the danger. He fired twice at James, both shots coming terrifyingly close. Then he made a decision. He rose from cover and began a steady, unhurried walk toward James's position, firing as he came. It was the move of either a madman or a supreme professional. James suspected the latter. James fired. The gunfighter's hat flew off. James fired again. The bullet grazed the man's shoulder but did not slow him. The gunfighter returned fire. His bullet struck the stone wall inches from James's head, showering him with rock fragments. They were 30 yards apart now, 25, 20. At 15 yards, James and the gunfighter fired simultaneously. The gunfighter's bullet struck James in the left side, a grazing wound that burned like fire. James's bullet hit the gunfighter in the chest, dead center. The man in black stopped walking. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then up at James. A slight smile crossed his face, recognition of a worthy opponent. Then he fell forward and did not move. Marcus screamed a sound of pure rage and disbelief. His professional killers had been defeated by 3 people fighting from cover with superior tactics and desperate courage. "Fall back," Marcus shouted. "Fall back." The surviving attackers, perhaps 5 men still able to fight, needed no additional urging. They scrambled for their horses, abandoning weapons and wounded comrades in their haste to escape. Sarah fired after them more to encourage their flight than with expectation of hitting anything. Ruth emerged from her position, shotgun smoking. James stood slowly, pressing his hand to the wound in his side. It was not deep, but it bled freely. He would live, but it needed attention. Marcus, the last to retreat, turned his horse and pointed at James. "This is not over, Redstone. I will return. I will bring the army if I must. This land will be mine." "Then come back," James shouted, "and I will kill you as I killed your hired guns. This is Apache land. It was given to my family by treaty. It will remain ours until the stones themselves turn to dust." Marcus spurred his horse and fled through the canyon passage. The sound of retreating hoofbeats echoed, then faded. Silence returned to Red Canyon. The kind of silence that follows violence, heavy with shock and exhaustion. Sarah ran to James's position. She saw the blood and went pale. "You are shot." "Just a graze. I have had worse." But his face had gone gray. The wound, while not fatal, had taken its toll. Combined with the adrenaline crash, it left him swaying. Ruth appeared with water and clean cloth. Between them, the 2 women supported James back to the cabin. They laid him on the bed, and Ruth, who had some nursing experience, began cleaning and binding the wound. "You are lucky," she said. "An inch deeper and it would have pierced your lung. As it is, it will heal clean if we keep it from infection." She worked with competent hands while Sarah held James still. He bore the pain without sound, but Sarah could see the strain in his clenched jaw. When Ruth finished bandaging, she stepped back. "He needs rest, real rest, and he should not ride for at least a week." James tried to sit up. "We do not have a week. Marcus will return. Maybe not with more gunmen, but with the law. He will claim we attacked him, that we are hostile Indians. The army will come next time." Sarah pushed him firmly back down. "Then we move. As soon as you can ride, we take your escape route. We go to Fort Stanton. We find William, and we use Ruth's evidence to destroy Marcus Webb." James looked at her, seeing the steel that had replaced fear. "You have become formidable, Sarah Bennett. You taught me well, James Redstone." They held each other's gaze. So much unspoken passed between them. Respect, trust, something deeper that neither was quite ready to name. Ruth cleared her throat. "I will check the perimeter. Make sure they took all their men." She left, giving them privacy. James reached up and touched Sarah's face. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for caring." Sarah leaned into his hand. "Where else would I be?" Outside, Ruth surveyed the battlefield. 8 men lay dead or dying. The dying she gave water and bandages, though they had tried to kill her hours before. That was simply who she was. As she worked, she found Marcus's dropped saddlebag. Inside, more incriminating documents. More proof of his schemes. Ruth also found something else. A letter addressed to Jeremiah Clayton, Fort Stanton, New Mexico. It detailed payment for one Apache boy, age 6, brown hair, blue eyes, William Redstone, though the letter called him by another name, Billy Clayton. Ruth took the letter back to the cabin. This was information James needed. His son had not just been sold. He had been renamed, given a new identity. Finding him would be harder than they thought, but they would find him. Ruth was certain of that now, because James Redstone did not quit. Neither did Sarah Bennett, and together they were unstoppable. As the sun set over Red Canyon, painting the cliffs in shades of amber and gold, 3 survivors prepared for the next phase of their journey. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over, and ahead lay a reckoning that would change all their lives forever. James spent 5 days healing before he could ride. Sarah changed his bandages twice daily. Ruth prepared poultices from herbs James identified, and slowly the wound closed clean. No infection took root. His body, hardened by years of frontier living, remembered how to mend itself. On the sixth day, James insisted on testing his strength. He walked the perimeter of the canyon, checked the defenses, counted the dead they had buried in shallow graves. 8 men, 8 lives ended because Marcus Webb wanted land and profit. Sarah found him standing over the graves at sunset, his face unreadable. "Regret?" she asked quietly. "No, they came to kill us. They chose their path. But I wonder about them. Did they have families, children who will never know their fathers? Or were they already empty men selling their lives because they had nothing left to protect? Does it matter?" James considered this. "Perhaps not. But I would prefer to believe we killed empty men. That makes it easier to sleep." Sarah took his hand. "We did what we had to do. That is all we can ever do." They stood together as the last light faded from the canyon walls, two people bound by survival and something deeper. Neither spoke of the kiss they had shared during the storm. Neither needed to. It remained between them, a promise waiting to be fulfilled when circumstances allowed. On the 7th day, a rider appeared at the canyon entrance. Not an attacker this time, but a messenger. He wore the uniform of the territorial sheriff's office and carried official documents. James met him at the entrance, rifled and ready but not aimed. "State your business." The messenger, a young man no more than 20, held up his hands, showing them empty. "I am Deputy Carson from Tucson. Sheriff Coleman sent me with summons. Marcus Webb has been arrested. He is charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You are requested to appear as witnesses at his trial." James lowered the rifle slightly. "When Quittem, 3 days from now, Tucson Courthouse." The deputy handed over the official papers. James scanned them, noting that Ruth Miller's name also appeared as a witness along with Thomas Gray. "Thomas Gray is testifying against Marcus." "Yes, sir. Mr. Gray turned himself in 2 days ago. He provided evidence about land fraud and detailed Mr. Webb's various schemes. Combined with documents, Miss Miller provided the territorial prosecutor believes he has a strong case. The territorial governor himself has taken interest in the case. After reviewing Miss Miller's ledgers, he ordered a special prosecutor from Santa Fe. Judge Morrison tried to recuse himself when his name appeared in the bribery records, but the governor denied the motion. Morrison has no choice but to oversee a fair trial or face charges himself." Sarah appeared at James's shoulder. "Will there be protection? Marcus has resources. He may try to silence witnesses." Deputy Carson nodded. "Sheriff Coleman will provide armed escort to and from the trial. You will be safe." James exchanged a glance with Sarah. They both knew this was their chance, not just for justice, but to buy time. If Marcus was in custody, he could not attack Red Canyon. They could travel to Fort Stanton without looking over their shoulders. "We will be there," James said. The deputy tipped his hat and rode away. When he was gone, Ruth emerged from the cabin. "A trial. I never thought I would see the day Marcus Webb faced justice." "Justice is not the same as conviction," Sarah warned. "Marcus has money and connections. He may find a way to escape consequences." "Not this time," Ruth said firmly. She held up a second ledger she had found hidden in Marcus's office. "This one details payments to Judge Morrison, Sheriff Palmer, and half the town council. If Marcus tries to bribe his way free, we have proof of those crimes too." 3 days later, they rode into Tucson under armed escort. The town was larger than Dry Creek, more civilized with brick buildings and actual streets. The courthouse stood at the center, an impressive structure that spoke of law and order. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Townspeople from Dry Creek had traveled to see their banker and mayor face judgment. Pastor Johnson sat in the front row, his face grave. Others Sarah recognized from the lottery day watch with expressions ranging from shame to vindication. Marcus Webb sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 lawyers. He wore an expensive suit and maintained an air of injured dignity. When his eyes found Sarah, they burned with hatred, quickly masked by affected indifference. The trial lasted 2 days. Sarah testified first, describing the lottery, her husband's suspicious death, Marcus's plans to claim her and her land. She spoke clearly without emotion, letting facts speak for themselves. Ruth testified next. She detailed Marcus's threats, his blackmail, his admission of poisoning David Bennett. She produced the ledgers, page after page of incriminating records. Thomas Gray testified third. His voice shook as he described how Marcus had ordered him to kill James Redstone, how Marcus had arranged the sale of Apache children, including William. He admitted his own crimes, freely asking for no mercy, only offering truth as partial restitution. Finally, James took the stand. He spoke of his son's disappearance, of the apprenticeship system that was slavery, by another name of Marcus's role in facilitating child trafficking for profit. The prosecutor, a stern man named Davidson, presented the railroad contract, the falsified land deeds, the payment records. He built a case so thorough that Marcus's lawyers could barely mount a defense. On the second day, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. Marcus's lawyers argued procedural technicalities, claiming the evidence was obtained illegally. But the prosecutor, a sharp man named Davidson from Santa Fe, countered that Ruth had lawful access to records as Marcus's employee, and Thomas Gray's testimony was given under oath in voluntary confession. When the jury returned, their faces were grave. The foreman, a rancher from outside Dry Creek with no connection to Marcus's schemes, stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Judge Morrison, who according to Ruth's ledger had previously taken bribes from Marcus, now faced his own reckoning. He sentenced Marcus Webb to 15 years hard labor at Yuma Territorial Prison, his property and assets seized to pay restitution. As marshals led Marcus away in chains, he turned one final time toward James and Sarah. "You have won nothing," he hissed. 15 years is not forever. I will return, and when I do, I will destroy everything you love." James met his gaze with cold indifference. "In 15 years, I will be 50 years old, still strong enough to kill you if you threaten my family. Remember that." Marcus was dragged away, still cursing. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Not complete freedom, not yet, but justice. Real, tangible justice. Outside the courthouse, Ruth embraced Sarah. "It is over. He cannot hurt us anymore." "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. "Return to Dry Creek. Raise my son. The town council has asked me to serve as interim mayor until new elections. They want to distance themselves from Marcus's corruption. It seems I have political opportunities I never imagined." Ruth smiled, but it was bittersweet. "I will always carry the shame of my silence, but perhaps I can spend the rest of my life making better choices." Sarah hugged her friend tightly. "You already have. You risked everything to warn us. You fought beside us. That is redemption, Ruth." They parted as friends, truly friends again, the betrayal, if not forgotten, then at least forgiven. James and Sarah stood in the Tucson street as evening approached. They had 3 horses, now having recovered mounts from the battle. They had supplies purchased with money from selling Marcus's stolen cattle. And they had information. Fort Stanton, Jeremiah Clayton, William Redstone, now called Billy Clayton. "How far?" Sarah asked. 400 miles. 3 weeks if we ride hard, longer if we take care. The route goes through Gila Wilderness, crosses the Rio Grande, passes through some of the harshest country in the territory. Then we should start at dawn. Every day we delay is another day William does not know his father lives." James nodded, but as they walked toward the boarding house where they had taken rooms, he stopped and turned to Sarah. "I need to say something. Before we find William, before everything changes again, I need you to know that these past weeks with you, they have been the first time in 4 years I have felt alive. Not just surviving, but living." Sarah felt her heart accelerate. "James, let me finish. I cannot promise you anything yet. I do not know what finding William will do to me, what it will require. But I want you to know that when this is over, when we have dealt with all the ghosts and obligations, I want to build something. With you. If you will have me." Sarah stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "James Redstone, I have been yours since the moment you refused to claim me, since you offered choice instead of command. I will wait however long it takes. And then, yes, I will have you." They kissed there in the Tucson street as the sun set and lamps began to glow in windows. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like a promise, a commitment to a future they would build together if they could survive long enough to reach it. The journey to New Mexico was 3 weeks of desert, mountain, river, and sky. They rode through country that tested both horses and riders, sleeping under stars so vast they seemed to press down with their weight. James led his knowledge of the land absolute. He found water where Sarah would have sworn none existed, found game in barren landscapes, found routes through impossible terrain. She realized, completely at home in wilderness. This was his world, one he navigated with the confidence of a man reading his own hand. Sarah learned as they traveled, learned to read the sky for weather, the ground for water, the behavior of animals for warnings. James taught her constantly, not with formal lessons, but through experience. When she made mistakes, he corrected gently. When she succeeded, he acknowledged with small nods that meant more than elaborate praise. Ruth's journal entry, which Sarah carried, described their journey. Ruth had given Sarah a small leather-bound book, insisting she document everything. For history, Ruth said, so that people would know what really happened. Sarah wrote by firelight each evening. She wrote about the landscape, the challenges, the growing bond between her and James. She wrote honestly, holding nothing back, creating a record of transformation. The woman who had stood on a lottery platform was gone. In her place was someone harder, more capable, more certain of her own strength. On the eighth night, camped beside the Rio Grande, James finally spoke about Anna at length. He had mentioned her before, but always briefly, always with pain too fresh to probe. But this night, with the river singing beside them and stars infinite overhead, he opened the door to his grief. She loved books, he began. Anna, she could read English, Irish, Gaelic, and learned Apache faster than anyone I ever knew. She used to read to William every night. Shakespeare, Dickens, Irish folk tales, Apache legends. She believed stories made us human, that they connected us across languages and cultures. Sarah listened without interrupting, sensing James needed to speak more than she needed to respond. When she died, I could not bear to look at books for months. They reminded me too much of her voice, her hands turning pages, the way she would act out different characters to make William laugh. He poked the fire, sending sparks into the night. I am telling you this because I need you to understand. Anna was not perfect. She had a temper, could be stubborn, made mistakes. But she was the first person who looked at me and saw a complete human being. Not half white and half Apache. Not a scout or a savage or anything defined by others. She saw James. Just James. And she loved that person. He turned to face Sarah. You do the same thing. You look at me and see me. Not the grief, not the anger, not the violence I am capable of. You see the man I am trying to be. That is rare. That is precious. Sarah moved closer, sitting beside him, their shoulders touching. You see me the same way. Not the victim, not the widow, not the woman sold at auction. You see Sarah, just Sarah, and you respect her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low. The river murmured its ancient song. Somewhere downstream, a night bird called. Finally, James spoke again. I am afraid of finding William and having him reject me, of discovering that 4 years has erased me from his memory, of learning that I am chasing a ghost of fatherhood rather than actual relationship. And if he does not remember you, if he chooses to stay with Clayton, James's voice was barely audible, then I will let him go, because that is what love requires. Not possession, but allowing the beloved to choose their own path, even if that path does not include you. Sarah took his hand, lacing their fingers together. Whatever happens, you will not face it alone. I am here. I will be here. James brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I know, and that makes me braver than I have been in years. They slept that night wrapped in the same blanket, not for warmth, though the desert night was cold, but for comfort. Two people who had learned that touch could heal as well as hurt. The journey continued. They crossed into New Mexico territory, passed through Silver City, navigated the Gila wilderness where Apache bands still move free from reservation constraints. James spoke to a group of Apache warriors they encountered, explaining his mission. The warriors, recognizing James's heritage and respecting his purpose, offered blessing and warned him about Army patrols in the area. On the 19th day, they reached Fort Stanton. The military outpost sat in a valley surrounded by grassland and distant mountains. It was larger than Sarah expected, with multiple buildings, corrals full of horses, and soldiers drilling in the parade ground. James sat his horse on a ridge overlooking the fort, his face unreadable. 4 years ago, William was brought through there, processed like cargo, given a new name, sold to the highest bidder. All legal, all documented, all perfectly within the law. The bitterness in his voice was acid. The same government that signed treaties with my people. The same government that promised protection and delivered death. That fort represents everything I have learned to hate. Sarah moved her horse alongside his. Then let us take your son from their system. Let us show them that some things cannot be owned even by law. They rode down into the valley. At the fort's post office, James inquired about Jeremiah Clayton's ranch with careful politeness. The clerk, a bored corporal, gave directions without suspicion. 10 miles north, large cattle operation. Cannot miss it. They reached Clayton Ranch as the sun touched the western horizon. It was impressive. Large main house, multiple outbuildings, hundreds of head of cattle grazing in fenced pastures. Prosperity built on land and labor. James dismounted slowly, his hands trembling slightly. This was the moment 4 years had built toward. The moment when hope would either be fulfilled or finally irrevocably crushed. Sarah squeezed his shoulder. We will face this together. They walked to the main house and knocked. The door opened to reveal a man in his 50s, weathered and stern, with the look of someone who had carved his life from hard country through harder work. Jeremiah Clayton. Help you. His voice was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile. James spoke carefully, controlling the emotion threatening to crack his voice. My name is James Redstone. I am looking for a boy, about 10 years old now. He was brought here 4 years ago. His name is William Redstone. Clayton's face hardened immediately. I do not know what you are talking about. You need to leave. But even as he spoke, a child appeared in the doorway behind him. A boy with dark hair and startling blue-green eyes. He wore ranch clothes and carried a book under his arm. He looked at James with curiosity, but no recognition. James's breath stopped. 4 years had changed his son from a small child to a growing boy. But those eyes, Anna's eyes, unmistakable. William, James whispered. The boy frowned. My name is Billy, Billy Clayton. Clayton put a hand on the boy's shoulder, protective and possessive. You need to leave now. This boy is under my legal guardianship. I have papers. James's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to grab his son and run. But that would solve nothing. The law would hunt them. William Billy would be traumatized. Force was not the answer. I know you have papers, James said, struggling to keep his voice level. Marcus Webb provided them, but they were based on a lie. This boy was not orphaned. He was stolen. His mother was murdered. I am his father. Billy's eyes widened. He looked up at Clayton. Is that true? Is he really my father? Clayton's face showed conflict. Whatever else he might be, he was not comfortable lying to a child's face. I do not know, son. Marcus told me you were orphaned in a raid, that there was no family. I had no reason to doubt him. Because you did not ask questions, Sarah said sharply. You needed labor. You paid $50. You did not care where he came from. Clayton flinched but did not deny it. Billy looked between the adults, confusion and fear warring in his young face. I do not remember you, he said to James. If you are my father, why do I not remember? James knelt, bringing himself to eye level with his son. Because you were 6 years old when we were separated. Because trauma makes memories fade. Because you have lived here for 4 years and built a new life. But I never forgot you, William, not for a single day. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. The carved wooden horse he had made when William was 5 years old. Simple, crude, but unmistakably the work of loving hands. I made this for you, do you remember? Billy stared at the horse. For a long moment, nothing. His fingers traced the rough wood, the simple carved lines. It felt familiar in his hand, the weight of it, the shape. Then like a dam, breaking fragments came. Not whole memories, but pieces. The smell of pine smoke. A woman's voice, high and sweet. Strong arms holding him. Stories about trickster coyote. The horse in his small hands while someone carved by firelight. There was singing where he whispered, his voice uncertain, testing the memory. A woman. Red hair. She sang strange words I did not understand. And stories. Someone told me stories. His hand tightened on the carving, and tears began to fall. Tears streamed down James's face. Your mother's name was Anna. She had red hair like fire. She sang you to sleep every night. And I told you Apache stories because I wanted you to know your heritage. Billy's legs gave out. He sat down hard, the carved horse clutched in his hands and began to cry. Not quiet tears, but great sobbing gasps as memory crashed over him like a wave. I remember. I remember her dying. Blood. Soldiers. I could not save her. I tried to stay with her, but they pulled me away. Clayton stepped back, his face pale. He had known perhaps that his acquisition of this boy was morally questionable, but confronted with the stark reality of a child's trauma, even his weathered conscience showed cracks. James gathered William into his arms. The boy stiffened at first, unfamiliar with this man, despite emerging memories. But James held him gently, not forcing, just offering presence. "It was not your fault," James said softly. "You were a child. You could not have saved her. But you are alive. And that is what she would have wanted." They sat in Clayton's parlor, an awkward assembly of four people whose lives had collided through tragedy and law. Clayton served coffee, his hands unsteady. Billy sat between James and Clayton, the physical positioning reflecting his torn loyalties. Sarah watched the boy carefully. He was in shock, his world upended by the revelation of hidden history. But beneath the shock, she saw intelligence. This child was trying to process, to understand, to make decisions beyond his years. "I have been good to him," Clayton said finally. "I know how this looks, but I have treated Billy well. Taught him to read, to work, cattle, to handle himself. He has had a good life here." "A life built on theft," James said flatly. "No matter how kind you have been, you purchased a stolen child. That cannot be undone." "I did not know he was stolen. Marcus told me." "You did not want to know. There is a difference." Clayton had no answer for that. Sarah actually felt a twinge of sympathy for the rancher. He had committed a crime, yes, but perhaps not knowingly. Or perhaps he had simply allowed himself willful ignorance. Either way, he was now confronted with consequences. Billy spoke, his voice small but steady. "What happens now? Do I have to leave? Is that man, is James, going to take me away?" James turned to his son. "I am not going to take you anywhere you do not wish to go, but I want you to know the truth. All of it, and then you can decide what you want." He spent the next hour telling William everything. About Anna, her love of books and teaching. About their life in the Apache village, the mixture of cultures and traditions. About the raid, the soldiers, the loss. About 4 years of searching, of never giving up hope. Billy listened with wide eyes. Occasionally he interrupted with questions. What was his mother like? What had their home been like? Did he have other family? James answered every question honestly. Yes, he had Apache family. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins living on the reservation. They would want to know him if he chose. When James finished, Billy turned to Clayton. "Did you know any of this?" Clayton hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Marcus told me you were orphaned. I believed him because it was convenient to believe him." "I am sorry, Billy. You deserved better than that." Billy sat silent for a long time. Then he looked at James. "If I go with you, what will my life be like?" "Honest," James said simply. "Hard. We live in Red Canyon in Arizona. It is isolated, difficult country, but it is beautiful, and it is yours by birthright. Your grandfather was given that land by treaty. You are Apache and Irish. You belong to two worlds. I can teach you both." He gestured to Sarah. "And Sarah, if you choose, will teach you the things your mother would have taught. Reading, writing, thinking. She is a teacher, like Anna was." Billy looked at Sarah with new interest. "You are a teacher." "I was. I can be again if you wish." Billy turned back to Clayton. "What do you want me to do?" Clayton's face worked with emotion. Whatever his crimes, his affection for this boy appeared genuine. "I want you to be happy, son. If that means staying here, you are welcome. If it means going with your real father, I will not stop you. But know this, you will always have a place at this ranch. If you want to visit, you can. If you want to come back, the door is open." Billy appreciated that. Sarah could see it in the boy's face. Clayton was giving him permission to leave without guilt. That was a gift. Finally, Billy spoke. "I want to go with James, with my father. But I also want to come back sometimes, to visit Mr. Clayton. Is that okay?" Relief flooded James's face so profound that Sarah had to look away, her own eyes stinging with tears. Yes, James said, his voice thick. Yes, that is more than okay. That is perfect. Billy stood and extended his hand to James. Not a hug, not yet. They were still strangers despite biology, but a handshake, recognition, agreement. James took his son's hand and shook it solemnly, man to man, father to son. They spent one night at Clayton Ranch before departing. Billy needed time to pack his belongings to say goodbye to the only home he consciously remembered. Clayton, to his credit, treated James with respect and offered provisions for the journey. That evening, Billy appeared at James's door. He clutched the carved horse and wore uncertainty like a cloak. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course." They walked outside, away from the house, to where the grasslands stretched toward mountains dark against the stars. Billy was quiet for a long time, sorting through thoughts too large for his young mind. "Mr. Clayton, I mean Jeremiah, he told me that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are not the same. He said what he did was legal, but it was not right. Is that true?" James considered how to answer. Truth, he had always believed, should not be simplified for children. Children could handle complexity better than adults gave them credit for. Yes, laws are made by people. People make mistakes. Sometimes laws protect those mistakes instead of correcting them. What happened to you was legal, but it was deeply wrong. So you broke the law by coming for me. No, I did not break any law. You are my son. That is a truth deeper than any law. And Mr. Clayton, to his credit, is not forcing you to stay. He is allowing you to choose. That makes him better than the law that gave him custody. Billy absorbed this. "I am scared," he admitted. "You are my father. I know that now. I can remember pieces, but I do not really know you. What if I do not like living with you? What if you do not like me?" James felt his heart crack open. This child, his son, was asking the questions James himself had feared. "Then we will work through it. Together. I will not pretend I know how to be a father to a 10-year-old boy. You were 6 when we were separated. I only knew how to be a father to a 6-year-old. We will both have to learn." He knelt beside Billy, eye to eye. "But I promise you this. I will never lie to you. I will never hurt you. And I will never stop trying to be the father you deserve. That is all I can promise. Is that enough?" Billy thought about it, then nodded slowly. "I think so. Can I ask you something else?" "Anything." "Sarah, is she going to be my mother?" James paused. He and Sarah had not discussed this, had not defined what they were to each other beyond partners and something more. "Do you want her to be?" "I think so. She is nice. And she looks at you the way I remember my mother looking at you, like you are important." James smiled despite himself. "We care for each other, but we have not made any formal commitment. Not yet. Things have been complicated. Because of finding me. Partly, also because both Sarah and I lost people we loved. It takes time to heal enough to love again. But yes, I think eventually Sarah and I will marry, if that is acceptable to you." Billy looked toward the house where Sarah sat with Clayton reviewing maps for the journey. "It is acceptable. I like her." They walked back together. Billy's hand slipped into James's, a small gesture, but monumental, the beginning of trust, of relationship, of family rebuilding itself from ashes. The next morning they departed. Clayton shook James's hand, his grip firm. "Treat him well, Redstone. He is a good boy." "I know, and thank you for not making this harder than it had to be." Clayton nodded, then turned to Billy. "Remember, this is your home too. Anytime you want to visit, you are welcome." Billy hugged Clayton, surprising the older man. Then he mounted the horse James had purchased for him, and they rode north toward Arizona, toward Red Canyon, toward home. The journey back took longer than the journey out. They stopped frequently, allowing Billy to rest, to adjust. James taught his son constantly how to read trails, how to find water, how to respect the land. Billy was a quick learner, soaking up knowledge like drought, parched earth, soaking up rain. Rora taught too. She rode beside Billy during the day, telling him stories from books, teaching him advanced reading, expanding his vocabulary. At night, she taught him about stars, about history, about the wider world beyond ranches and reservations. And slowly, over 3 weeks of trail and campfire, they became a family. Not perfect, not without awkward moments and misunderstandings, but real, committed to each other. On the 21st day, they crested a ridge and saw a red canyon spread below them. The autumn sun painted the cliffs in shades of amber and crimson. The creek still ran silver in the valley, and the rebuilt cabin stood solid smoke rising from its chimney. Ruth had kept her promise. She had arranged for townspeople to maintain the canyon in their absence, to ensure no one claimed it while they traveled. "This is home," James said to Billy. "What do you think?" Billy stared at the hidden valley with wonder. "It is beautiful, like something from a story." Sarah smiled. "It is your story now, yours and ours." They descended into the canyon as the sun set. That night, they lit a fire in the cabin's hearth and ate a simple meal. Billy fell asleep on the bed while James and Sarah sat by the fire. "Thank you," James said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up, for fighting beside me, for helping me find my son, for being the strength I needed when my own faltered." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We are partners, remember? That is what partners do." "Sarah Bennett, will you marry me properly this time? Not because of a lottery or circumstance, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you." Sarah lifted her head and looked into his eyes. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed by firelight, sealing a promise born from tragedy, but built on choice and respect in love earned through trial. The fire in the present-day cabin had burned low. James paused in his story, his 65-year-old hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Daniel sat motionless, completely absorbed. "And that is how your grandmother and I came to be," James said. "How we built this family from the ashes of loss." Daniel looked toward the bedroom where Sarah slept. "She is dying, is not she, Grandma Sarah?" James nodded slowly. "The doctor gives her weeks, maybe a month. Her heart is failing. There is nothing to be done." "Does she know?" "She knows. We have discussed it. She is not afraid. She says she has lived a full life, love deeply left her mark. She is ready." Daniel wiped his eyes. "And you, Grandpa, when she is gone, what will you do?" James looked toward the bedroom, love and grief mingling in his expression. "I will grieve, as I grieve for Anna, but I will not die with her. Sarah made me promise that. She said life is measured in moments, not breaths, and there are still moments worth living for. My son, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. This land, this legacy." He picked up the Winchester from across his knees. "That is why I am giving you this rifle. Not because I expect you to use it, but because I want you to understand what it represents. This weapon has taken 3 lives, but it has also protected 12. It is a tool, Daniel. Neither good nor evil. What matters is the hand that holds it and the heart that guides that hand." Daniel took the rifle reverently. "I will honor it, and I will honor what it represents. That is all I ask. Remember, violence should always be the last resort. But when all other options are exhausted, when those you love are threatened, do not hesitate. Hesitation gets good people killed." The bedroom door opened. Sarah emerged wrapped in a shawl, moving slowly but with dignity intact. At 60, illness had diminished her body but not her presence. She still carried herself like the school teacher who had refused to be broken, the woman who had learned to fight and survived. She smiled, seeing James and Daniel together. "Are you filling his head with war stories again?" James rose and helped her into the chair beside him. "I am teaching him what he needs to know. The difference between killing and murder. Between strength and cruelty." Sarah took James's hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 31 years together. "And have you told him the important part? That we chose each other every day? That love is not a feeling but a decision we made again and again?" "I was getting to that." Sarah looked at Daniel. "Your grandfather saved my life. But more than that, he gave me back my own power. He taught me I did not need to be rescued. I needed to be capable of rescuing myself. That is what real love does. It does not diminish. It elevates." Daniel nodded, struggling with emotion. "Where is my father, Uncle William?" "In Phoenix," James said. "He is a lawyer like your great-uncle David was. He has a wife, your Aunt Claire, and your cousins. He comes to visit every Christmas. He knows who he is, knows his heritage, walks proudly in both his Apache and Irish bloodlines." Sarah added softly, "He named his daughter Anna, after his mother, and his son James after your grandfather. The legacy continues." They sat together, 3 generations united by firelight and story. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, coating the canyon in white. But inside, warmth and memory kept the cold at bay. Finally, James spoke again. Daniel, I have told you where we came from. Now I need you to understand where you are going. This ranch, this land, it will be yours someday. Not just the property, but the responsibility that comes with it. You will be the guardian of something built by people who refuse to accept that might makes right, who fought against corruption and cruelty, who chose love over hate, mercy over vengeance. He stood slowly, his 65-year-old body still strong, but showing its years. Walk with me. I want to show you something. They went outside, leaving Sarah by the fire. The snow fell gently, catching moonlight. James led Daniel to a small fenced area at the canyon's edge. Two headstones stood there, simple but well-maintained. Anna Redstone, 1845 to 1878, beloved wife and mother. Below it, a newer stone, David Bennett, 1848 to 1882, man of law and principle. These are the people who made us possible, James said. Anna gave me William. David gave Sarah her moral compass. They died so that we could learn what mattered, so that we could fight for something bigger than ourselves. Daniel read the stones, understanding the weight his grandfather carried. These were not just memories. They were foundations. I will remember them. I will tell their stories to my children. That is all they would ask. They returned to the cabin. Sarah had moved to the bedroom, tired from even brief exertion. James helped her settle, tucking blankets around her with infinite gentleness. I'm glad you told Daniel, Sarah said. He needed to know the full story. I know, and he needed to hear it before you are gone, so he understands where he comes from. Sarah touched James's face. I am not afraid, you know, of dying. I have lived more in 31 years with you than most people live in a century. I was sold at auction and became a warrior. I was a widow and found love again. I helped raise a son who was not mine by blood, but became mine by choice. I built something meaningful. Her eyes closed briefly, then opened again. Promise me you will not become bitter when I am gone. Promise me you will live, not just survive, that you will watch our grandchildren grow and teach them what we learned, that you will tend this land and keep it safe for future generations. I promise, James said, his voice breaking. But Sarah, I do not know how to do this without you. Yes, you do. You did it once before when you lost Anna. You survived. You will survive again. But this time you have William. You have family. You have this legacy we built together. You will not be alone. She pulled him down and kissed him gently. I love you, James Redstone. You were the best choice I ever made. And you were mine, Sarah Bennett Redstone. She slept then, her breathing shallow but peaceful. James sat beside the bed, holding her hand, keeping vigil as the night deepened. 3 weeks later, Sarah passed quietly in her sleep. The funeral was held in Red Canyon, attended by over 100 people. Ruth came from Dry Creek now. Mayor Miller, a respected figure who had transformed her town through honest leadership. Thomas Gray came old and weathered and still carrying guilt, but grateful for the chance to pay respects to people who had shown him mercy when he deserved none. William came with his family. He had grown into a fine man, successful in his career, but never forgetting his roots. His children, Anna and James Jr., stood solemnly as their grandmother was laid to rest beside the cabin she had defended and loved. The headstone read simply, Sarah Bennett Redstone, 1853 to 1913. Teacher, warrior partner, beloved. After the funeral, James stood on the ridge overlooking the canyon, watching the sun set as he had done thousands of times before. But this time Daniel stood beside him, the Winchester rifle across his shoulders, just as James had once carried it. What will you do now, Grandpa? James considered the question. The grief was fresh, sharp a knife in his chest, but beneath it was something else. Gratitude, pride, the knowledge that he had loved and been loved, that he had built something lasting. I will live, he said finally. As Sarah made me promise, I will watch you grow. I will teach your cousins what I taught you. I will tend this land and keep the stories alive. And when my time comes, I will go knowing I did what I could with what I was given. He put his arm around his grandson's shoulders. The world tried to break me, Daniel. The government took my father. Soldiers took my wife and son. A corrupt banker tried to destroy everything I loved. But I am still here. We are still here, that is victory, not the loud kind with medals and parades, but the quiet kind, the kind that matters. Daniel leaned into his grandfather's embrace. Will you teach me everything? All the stories, all the skills, all the lessons? Yes, every single one, Shalom, because that is how legacy works. Not through property or money, but through knowledge and values passed from one generation to the next. You will teach your children. They will teach theirs. And someday far in the future, people will know that once there was a man who won his wife in a cruel lottery, and together they built something beautiful from that ugliness. They stood together as stars emerged, a 66-year-old man and a 17-year-old boy, separated by decades but united by blood and story and purpose. Far below, Red Canyon settled into night. Lights glowed in windows. Horses moved in corrals. The creek sang its eternal song. And the land, ancient and enduring, held them all in its redstone embrace. James Redstone had survived. More than survived. He had lived, loved, lost, and loved again. He had found his son, built a family, created a legacy, and when 7 years later he passed peacefully in his sleep at 73, his last words were simple and profound. Tell William his father loved him. Tell Daniel to remember the stories, and tell Sarah I am coming home. The rifle passed to Daniel, who passed it to his son, who passed it to his son. And with each passing came the story, the bride lottery, the hidden canyon, the search for a stolen child, the battle against corruption, the love that bloomed in impossible circumstances. 4 generations later, the rifle hangs above a fireplace in Red Canyon, still maintained, still ready. Still a reminder that sometimes the most important weapons are not the ones that take life, but the ones that protect what matters. And on quiet nights when wind howls through the canyon and stars wheel overhead, you can almost hear it, the echo of voices telling stories. James teaching William to track, Sarah teaching Anna to read, Ruth finding forgiveness, Thomas seeking redemption. The past is never truly gone. It lives in the stories we tell, the values we teach, the legacy we leave. And in Red Canyon, that legacy endures.